Hi, everybody. I am so glad that you're joining us through these podcasts that we've been having, body, soul, and spirit. It is our desire to see you prosper in body, prosper in your soul, and prosper in your mind. We've been coming to you and we want to talk about being healthy and prospering in our soul, which includes our emotions and it includes our mind. And we've been talking about grief and the different symptoms that are in us that we experience when we are grieving in the past. If you were with us in the last few episodes, we talked about depression, which is actually one of the symptoms of grief and how we begin to respond to grief. But today I want to just pause for a moment and talk about trauma because every one of us has been through a trauma, some form of trauma. We've all experienced something in our lives that was traumatic. We are around trauma on a continual basis. We are always facing trauma. Trauma is really everywhere. You go to work and you're going to find that somebody has been through trauma. Perhaps you have. And you go to even church and you'll find people that have been in trauma or have had past traumas. School, whatever age you are, we've all been through trauma. You go to the gym and there's not a person in the gym that has not been through trauma or is going through trauma. Trauma will show up in our lives. And I want you to just kind of, in this podcast, identify where trauma is showing up in your life. Because perhaps this trauma occurred years ago. Maybe something happened 5 years ago. It was a traumatic experience. Let's identify, first of all, let's define trauma. It is something that you were exposed to, an event that you were exposed to, and it caused a stress. It caused something in your life. You were exposed to something, whether it was loss or whether it was betrayal or whether it was something that you've been through. And now you are facing these events in your life, a stress, something in your life that now you're expressing. And I want to be able through this podcast quickly to identify what is behind a lot of the things that are happening to you. Could it be that maybe trauma is behind your perfectionism? Could trauma be behind now your defensive attitude where you get very defensive? Could trauma be behind a lot of the maybe interactions that you have with other people? Could trauma be behind problems that you have with relationships? Could trauma be behind problems that you have with yourself? Could trauma be behind a lot of the fears that now you are facing? Could trauma be behind a lot of the isolation that maybe you begin to have in your life? You like to isolate yourself. You don't want to be around anybody. Could trauma be behind a lot of the irritations that you have when it comes to relationships with other people? Maybe trauma is behind a lot of the low self-esteem that you have when you look at yourself and you have now insecurity issues. Could it be that it's trauma that is really behind a lot of this stuff? Or maybe self-pity, or maybe entitlement. You feel like people owe you something or it's owed to you. And now you feel maybe this entitlement, the sense of entitlement, or you have low, just a self-pity. You go into this self-pity mode. You start thinking that nothing good ever happens to you. Is trauma behind all of that? Could trauma be behind the rebellion? Maybe there's a sense of stubbornness and resistance in your life because trauma is behind that. Could trauma be behind a lot of the habitual habits that you have? Maybe you like to cut yourself. Maybe you like to hurt yourself. Maybe you like to bite. Now you find yourself having all these traumatic, just events in your life. But really, trauma is behind a lot of these, how can we call it? Just the way you respond, the way you react. When you look at trauma, it causes stress. Stress is actually a response to all the trauma that we have faced. Your body is actually doing what it's supposed to do. So now you're responding, you're reacting in forms of rejection. You start to feel in thoughts, et cetera, et cetera. So trauma is, I want you to think of something that you were exposed to, something that happened outside of you, whether it was directly or indirectly done to you, but it's causing stress in your life. And we have symptoms. We get symptoms because of our trauma. We have stress disorders, intrusive memories, we replay events, flashbacks, anxiety, all of these things. We have hyper vigilant. We start thinking that, we're on high alert, something falls and drops, and you panic. Could something in your life right now be the cause of a trauma? I want you to pause in your life for just a moment in the next few days while we come back together and join in these podcasts. And I want you to get you on this journey of thinking in regards to our trauma. Trauma, whether it was big or little, it caused a wound in our lives. But I want you to start thinking in terms of, could a lot of our reactions and responses be because of a trauma that happened to us? I want to talk about that. Let's get on that journey, and we will see you guys in our next podcast.